Hi everyone. You're all very welcome on to today's webinar, how best to prepare for your children's and potentially your grandchildren's and relatives' education costs. Today's webinar is very much focused on how you can prepare for your children's or potentially your relatives' education costs. It's something that we're always very busy with in Alpha Wealth. It can be a very expensive time for parents, a very stressful time. And look, hopefully there'll be some good takeaways throughout the presentation that'll help you get in the best possible position for that. For anyone who doesn't know me, my own name is David Looney. I work as a financial planner with Alpha Wealth, and I am joined by some of my colleagues on the webinar today, including Cliona O'Donoghue, who's going to be monitoring the Q&A box. We do like to make these webinars relatively informal, so please do feel free to pop in any questions that you have into the Q&A box, and Cliona will get to them throughout the webinar. We might even allow a bit of time at the end as well. For anyone who's not very familiar with Alpha Wealth or who might be on these webinars for the first time, we run an impartial financial services company located in Cork. We've 10 advisors in Alpha Wealth to basically provide advice to individuals and families like yourself, and get you in the best possible position when it comes to your personal finances. The things we specialize in are financial planning, savings and investments advice, retirement planning, protection, tax reduction, mortgages, really everything within that personal finance space. And I'm happy to say at this point we are celebrating our 10th year in business this year, and over that period we are happy to, I suppose, announce that we've amassed 4,000 clients from all around Ireland who now have over 300 million of assets under management with Alpha Wealth. So myself and my colleagues have a lot of experience, helping people manage their money more effectively and planning for future milestones like kids' education costs. Um, we do also run a lot of these online free webinars. We've been doing them quite frequently over the last couple of years, and just to spend a bit of time maybe talking about the next upcoming ones for anyone who might be interested. We do have one coming up on the 3rd of October, which is planning for financial independence, retire by 55 and live your best life. That's going to be done by my colleague Nick. Nick will also be doing another one following the budget in October. So that's on the 1st of October, just going through the main points of the budget and how that impacts people and the benefits of it, etc. And finally, I'll be doing one myself on the 15th of October, which will be navigating redundancy, get to know your options. Is something I've been very busy this year with a lot of major Irish employers announcing a lot of kind of layoffs and redundancies. You can register for all of those and find out some information on all of those on our website, alphawealth.ie. You can see the tab on the homepage there, upcoming webinars and events. So it's just a case of clicking on that. But if anyone needs more information, look, feel free to get in touch. But back to today's webinar anyway. So what are the key takeaways from today's webinar? So firstly, we're going to be talking about exactly how much education costs and how much people should have set aside. And I often find dealing with clients, they massively underestimate just how much it can potentially cost to send their kids or their relatives through third level education. When you add up the costs of kind of fees, food, books, materials, and potentially even rent. And as a result, a lot of them are really underprepared, and it does cause, a lot of stress and, financial heartaches down the line. So I suppose it's really important to plan early on. We will be looking at how much people should be saving on an ongoing basis, maybe to meet those future costs. Very important, we'll be talking about where you should be saving. And I think this is maybe where a lot of Irish people, admittedly, maybe fall down on. There was a lot of statistics released recently that Irish households have over 140 billion in short-term 0% interest paying accounts. So even in times now of higher interest rates, a lot of people aren't, I suppose, taking advantage of those higher interest rate paying accounts that are out there. And finally, we'll just be focusing on maybe some tax considerations people should have if they are planning on gifting money to their kids or potentially their grandchildren or relatives. As I mentioned, we will allow a bit of time at the end as well for a Q&A, so feel free to pop them into the chat box. So there's a lot of statistics and surveys out there on exactly how much education costs, and this, I suppose, image on screen here is provided by Zurich, who are one of the largest insurance companies operating in Ireland. It just goes into the annual cost and the lifetime cost of primary school, secondary school, and third level education, which is kind of the main one, I suppose, that all of us are trying to save for the most expensive one. So if we look at the annual cost and the lifetime cost, obviously if your kids are planning on staying at home, if you're living in, Cork, Dublin, Galway, etc., Limerick, that have a good network of colleges, your kids might be staying at home, and the average annual cost can range usually in the region of about €6,000, up to a lifetime cost of 24,000 over the kind of 4 to 5 years of third level education. Now, if your kids are renting, those costs can skyrocket. You're talking potentially up to €16,000 per year, a total of 64,000 over the duration of third level. And if they're staying in a student accommodation complex, the rent is generally a little bit cheaper. So it can be as much as €11,000 per year. And a total of 44,000 over the 4 to 5 years, let's say, of third level education. So on average, it can range from about 24,000 right up to 64,000. It is an expensive time, and early planning is absolutely vital. So if anybody answered that poll earlier and guessed or knew that it was in the region of kind of 20 to 30,000, you would have been right. It's something that is gathered a lot of attention in the press as well over the last couple of weeks. Like, you've had a lot of articles from the Business Post and the Irish Times alluding to the fact that education costs and rent for students has massively increased over the last couple of years, and hopefully it just reinforces how much of an expensive time in your life it can potentially be, and that it is really important to plan for it early on. So for anyone on the call who might have kids that are quite young, not only do you have to not only do you have to plan for those costs, but you also have to plan for the fact that those costs are going to increase over the years with inflation, because everything gets more expensive year on year. As we know, typically about 2.5% to 3% per year, everything gets more expensive by. And when we're doing a financial plan with clients, we often, they are tailored to the individual. So it's about looking at your own situation and kind of projecting forward. And these are just some projections that I've done with clients. And recently, they had 2 dependents. One was age 2 and the other was age 4. And they anticipated that the kids might be staying at home whilst they're in college. And basically, the projections are stating that for their eldest, the cost is going to be about €33,790, and for the youngest, for the other way around, for the youngest, it would be 33,790, and for the eldest, 32,000. Now, the reason that there's a difference there is because obviously the costs are projected to increase over that 2-year period. Now, that might seem like a very large amount of money required, which of course it is, but you can do a lot of damage saving early on. So as people know, you generally get €140 per child for the child benefit payment. So if you have 2 kids, that's a total of €280. And this projection is actually saying that you can reach those fund values by putting away €238 now, which is actually less than the total child benefit of 280 in that case. Obviously, the costs, as I said earlier, they do skyrocket if we're planning on the assumption that they might be in student accommodation. So you're up in the region of about €60,000 per child there. And what you'll have to save, obviously, is much more. Now, look, I appreciate not everybody, can afford saving €437 a month. Life is very expensive in Ireland at the moment, but it's really just a case of doing what you can do. You might have opportunities over the course of your life to increase savings a bit more. Maybe they'll get, gifts from, grandparents and stuff. And obviously, there are things like grants, and the reality that, look, a lot of students now might have part-time jobs. So it's not a case that we have to finance every available cent potentially of education related costs. But as I said, it's just about doing something early on to, put yourself in a better position down the line. So what advice do we usually give to parents to get them into the best possible position? The first is saving as early as possible. The second is, if you can get into the habit of saving the child benefit payments of €140 per month, in my experience, I usually find that people are in a pretty good position doing that, and they usually have enough money. And number 3 is always seek positive interest on your savings, because inflation, as we've seen, is the biggest challenge. And I still meet a lot of parents that are using accounts in the credit union and on Post, which respectfully are a complete waste of time, and I'll be addressing that later on in later slides in the presentation. Earning positive interest obviously will get you to your goals much faster, and it'll allow your money to keep pace with inflation. There's no point saving for something that's going to increase by 3% every single year when your savings aren't earning 3% because you're just going backwards. And as I already said, you can do quite a lot of damage by saving just a child benefit of €140 per month over the long term and earning a decent interest rate, which is demonstrated by this example here. So saving €140 per month over 17 years, so from a time when your child is one, earning 3.5% per year would result in a fund value of 39,000, which is obviously more than enough to meet those projected costs that I showed you earlier if they're at home. So where is the best place to save? The key thing that people need to appreciate is it really comes down to time frame. And if there's one bit of advice I can impart on everyone in this webinar, is to have that distinction between your short-term savings and your longer-term savings, and accept that you need to have a different strategy and a different account depending on those timeframes. So when I talk about the short term, I'm talking about, say, today to that 4-year period. So for anyone on the call that has kids that are going to third level education in the next 4 years, they kind of need to stick to bank savings accounts. Over the last, say, 10, 12 years, people, I suppose, got very used to the fact that we were operating in this low interest rate environment, and your banks, your credit unions, your post offices, they were all practically paying 0% interest, and people got, inherently lazy when it came to their savings. But that changed a lot in the last 2 years because interest rates went up, and you can get quite good interest rates now even in bank savings accounts, and nobody on the call should be accepting 0% interest on their savings. I wouldn't usually recommend people look at the credit union or on Post. I know people do. The credit union, I don't believe, give any interest at all, and on Post the rates aren't great. Now, for people that have more than 4 to 5 years, so 5 years plus ideally in mind, they need to be investing their money, because whilst we can get better interest rates from bank savings accounts and, on Post and stuff, the reality is that none of those interest rates earn a return that keeps pace with inflation. So over a longer period of time, it can be quite devastating. Whilst investments will get you inflation beating returns, and you have that window to venture into that side of, I suppose the investing world. So if we look firstly at those short-term savings accounts, so let's say anyone in the call that needs the money in that, say, 1 to 4 year window, I usually am recommending at the moment that people check out some of these new online banks that have ventured into the Irish market over the last couple of years, the likes of your Revolut, your Trade Republic, your Raisin.ie, your Bunks. It's just really about adjusting to the new reality. Like if I spoke to people 20 years ago about Revolut, you would have thought it's completely left field. And nowadays, every day, nearly every client I meet has a Revolut account that they use quite regularly. The bank that I usually tell clients to go to at the moment, the one I use for my own savings, is actually a bank called Trade Republic. You can access it online, or you can set it up on your app store on your phone. And I'm just going to compare it to the state savings product to show you how much of a waste of time the state savings is compared to using one of these online banks. So firstly, if we compare them on security, a lot of people go with the state savings because it's guaranteed. But if you look at a bank like Trade Republic, firstly, they're an A credit rated German bank. All banks basically, they have a credit rating based on their financial strength. And most Irish banks are actually a B credit rating. So by having money in Trade Republic, your money is arguably in a stronger bank than most Irish banks. And because it's with an EU bank, it's actually covered under the EU Deposit Guarantee Scheme, which basically means that if the bank folds, the government in that country insure the money up to €100,000 per account. So if you think about it, both of them effectively provide the same guarantee. It's a state guarantee in both cases. Now, if we look at the interest rate, a lot of people go with state savings because the returns are tax-free, but they are measly. They have 3 different offerings. They have the 3-year one, the 5-year one, and the 10-year one. They give an annual rate, albeit tax-free, of 1.3%, 1.74%, and 2%. Anyone who is considering tying up their money for 10 years to earn a return of just 2% per year, it's insanity, guys. Honestly, all of those interest rates fail to beat inflation. Trade Republic, sorry, I do need to update this because obviously the European Central Bank reduced interest rates a couple of days ago by 0.25%. Trade Republic was giving an interest rate of 3.75. It's now giving an interest rate of 3.5. Okay, so it's a reduction of that 0.25%. But even after dirt tax is applied, it brings the after tax return down to 2.35%, which is a higher interest rate than all of these state savings products are given. And the term of this account is completely open-ended. You can access the money at any stage at no penalties, and the interest is actually given on a monthly basis. So every month that your money is sitting inside a Trade Republic, it earns 1/12 of this 3.5% rate. Whereas with the state savings, they generally involve tying away the money for longer periods. So look, hopefully that reinforces the fact that there are much better options out there, even for that short-term cash. And people
David,
do,
I'm
yeah.
just going to jump in there with a question. Why would you not leave your money in somewhere like Trade Republic for the longer term option?
Great question. So the reason I'm only talking about Trade Republic for short-term savings, Cleena, is that once you pay tax on the 3.5%, it takes the after-tax return, as I said, down to about 2.35%. And history has shown that long-term average inflation rates are somewhere between 2.5% to 3% per year. So while it's fine, inflation slightly eating into our money over 1, 2, 3, 4 years, it becomes very devastating over, a 5, 10, 15-year period. So like if I have a child this year and they're not going to go to college for 18 years and my money is losing value in real terms for 18 years, that becomes quite devastating. And that's really why these accounts are only suitable for short-term savings. To get inflation beaten returns, we do need to invest the money, which I'll be moving on to in a second.
David, sorry, now before you move on, just another kind of comment has come in to say that Revolut has the same and it pays interest daily. Can you just address that as well?
That's a great point. Okay, just be careful with Revolut and similar banks because they advertise quite high rates, but when you look under the bonnet, they're not as attractive as they first seem. What I found with Revolut, just to be cautious, one of the interest rates that they advertise a lot applies to a different currency account. So I think it's a sterling account, whereas if you're opting to have the euro equivalent, it's a lesser interest rate. Then they also advertise a high interest account, but I think it only applies to their prime account or something. So having that account with the higher interest rate involves a subscription, a monthly subscription. So you're getting a higher interest rate, but you're paying a fee basically to have the account. With Trade Republic, there's no subscription or account fees. It's a free account. And just be careful as well, because a lot of banks, they have, a lot of these online banks, they get you to invest in what are called money market funds. They're basically like a fund made up of loads of different deposit accounts rather than your money being with one bank. And because they're classified as a fund rather than a deposit, they're not covered under the EU deposit guarantee scheme. So just be careful of exactly what you are putting your money into, and just ensure that you do have the security of the EU deposit guarantee scheme and that you're not paying for the account.
David, one or two more questions that we may as well address before we move on from this. Is dirt paid automatically from a Trade Republic account?
Another great question. Some accounts take they pay it gross, okay, but with Trade Republic, they actually pay you, they credit you the interest. Sorry, I meant to say some pay it net, but with Trade Republic, they credit you the interest gross. So it's actually up to you to file it in your end of year tax return. It's quite easy. Like I'm sure most people on the call are quite used to doing an online tax return on the My Account section of the Revenue website. And once you're flicking across the tabs, your employment income will probably be in there by default. And then once you move to the next tab, it'll say like, other or additional income. And you basically just put in deposit interest. So like if say if Trade Republic has paid you €300 in interest over the preceding 12 months, you just put in €300 there as excess income and they'll automatically calculate what's owed on that and you can pay it separately.
And lastly, just before you move on then, do you know what is the bank credit rating with Revolut, and would you advise saving larger amounts, let's say 20 or 30k, into a Revolut account?
I think a Revolut, a Latvian bank, I'll have to look into that. I don't know what the credit rating is, and that's like I have a Revolut account myself, and the reason I don't put money into Revolut for savings is because I use Trade Republic, because when I looked under the bonnet of both, I find that Trade Republic is better on all fronts, i.e. it's with an A credit rated bank, it's covered under the EU deposit guarantee scheme, and it's giving an interest rate of 3.75%, now 3.5%, without any subscription costs or, I suppose, hidden agendas.
In terms of the 20 or 30K to invest, where would you put that? And that might bring you on to your next slide, David. I'm not too sure.
Yeah, again, like basically what I'd like everyone on the call to do, okay, is with all of your existing savings and anytime you save money going forward, I want you to ask yourself the question, what's the likelihood that this money is still going to be in this account in 5 years' time? And if the answer is very likely or almost guaranteed, it does not belong in a bank account, a credit union account, a Trade Republic account, or an Unpost account, okay? For that portion of your savings, you need to invest the money. Now, the reason we also talk about investing money for that 5+ years is that history has shown that once you have that long period ahead of you, your chances for investment success are very, very high. Whereas in the shorter term, we know that markets can be quite volatile. So what this just shows here on screen is if you had invested in a well-diversified investment fund, which was roughly 60% stocks, 40% bonds, any day since 1926, so that's over a 98-year period. So any day over that 98-year period, which would be nearly 36,000 periods. If you look down here at the bar chart, if you had held your investment for 5 years, so any 5-year rolling period, your chances of making money were 95%. But if you hold it for 10 years, 100% of the time, you would have made money within this particular fund. History has shown that there's never been a 10-year plus period where a fund that was 60% stocks, 40% bonds was negative. So what that proves is that even though markets can be volatile in the short term, they do move upwards over a longer trajectory. So the longer the time frame that we have, the less risk it is. And this doesn't just come for your child savings, it comes for your own savings. It extends to what you do with your pension. History has shown that long-term investors get rewarded and they achieve inflation-beaten returns. And that's because if we're getting exposure to things like equities, which are stocks and shares, they've generally delivered the best returns out of any other asset class, including property, including bonds. So once we have the time frame to get exposure to them, it makes complete sense. What history also shows us is that by adding more diversification into our fund or our portfolio, i.e. not having a fund that's all stocks and shares, but having a fund that's, bonds, stocks, cash, property, alternatives, all into one fund, i.e. spreading our risk, it actually reduces risk and it reduces volatility. Because if you, let's say, had a fund that was 100% stocks, we have had 10-year rolling periods where that fund has shown negative returns if you look at things like the S&P 500. But in the case of a fund that was only 60% stocks and 40% bonds, we've never had a 10-year rolling period where it's been negative. And this is why I don't really like, these clients that come to me that are investing in ETFs online, they're buying the S&P 500, they're buying their own stocks and shares, because a lot of the time they're not aligning that with their objective in mind. Like, really, if you're investing in ETFs or 100% stock portfolios, that's really only appropriate for very, very long-term investing. So like a 20+ year window. So absolutely fine for, let's say, your pension, which potentially, your retirement is over 20 years away. But if you're investing for something coming up in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 to 15 years, it mightn't be appropriate. So that's why you need to move a bit down this risk scale.
And David, where is the best place to go? Oh, sorry, you've led me to the next slide. I may as well, I'll let you talk about this before I address a few more of the questions that have come in, and we'll come to them after you've spoken about this.
Perfect. Yeah, so look, a lot of people on the call hopefully might now accept that they do need to invest their long-term savings, but maybe they just don't really know where to go, which is acceptable. So a couple of years ago, we set up the Alpha Savings and Investment Club basically to educate Irish savers on the alternative savings options that are out there in the market, arrange those accounts for them, give them the ongoing updates, and give them the reassurance that we're all investing in the same thing, including my own savings, by the way. So the features of the Alpha Savings and Investment Club is it basically allows people to save into a well-diversified saving fund, the best funds in the Irish market, on either a monthly basis or a lump sum basis. It can be started from as little as €100 per month. So a lot of my clients would set one up for their children's education in mind and paying the €140 per month. It's very flexible in that you can increase how much is going in there, you can decrease it, you can stop, you can restart. It does provide exposure to the best performing savings funds in the Irish market, and there's loads of different funds that you can choose, from low risk funds right up to higher risk, higher return funds, and everything in between. Again, the risk level you take always comes down to the time frame that you have in mind. And we do offer these accounts at the lowest fee structures in the Irish market. We even give people 101% allocation on their money, because there is a 1% government levy that's charged on contributions to these savings funds. So we actually give people an extra 1% to reimburse them for the costs of that government levy. The main funds we focus on are actually in Zurich. We have no ties to Zurich. We deal with every main provider in the Irish market, but we find that they are the best performers within the Irish market. And, I'm happy to show people a bit more on that. But just to give people a bit of a sense as to what's under the bonnet, one of the most popular funds that we would typically look at is a fund called the Active Asset Allocation Fund. It's a medium risk fund. Earlier, I showed you the kind of historic performance of a 60-40 fund, which I'm not a big fan of that term, to be honest. Like, it's just kind of, a fluff. People become obsessive with a 60-40, but all it really is just a diversified portfolio. The active asset allocation fund actually only has 41% exposure to market. So it's, arguably a lot lesser risk than a 60-40 fund, but it's a very, very well diversified fund. Absolutely ideal for, kid savings in mind. It has exposure to over 400 assets, so really well diversified. And it's produced quite attractive annualized returns, over 7% per year over a 5 to 10 year period. Now, what you'll notice, obviously, is that it hasn't moved in an upwards trajectory all the time. We do have years where markets fall, i.e. COVID 2022, but it's part of the process of investing. And the longer you hold your fund, ideally more than 5 years, you'll benefit from the fact that there's going to be a lot more good years than bad years. So for anyone on the call who does have that 5-year window ahead of them, the chances are massively stacked in their favor, and they should be chasing these higher returns which outperform inflation.
So, David, I'm going to jump in there again, and I'm going to ask you one or two questions just on this kind of fund and maybe setting it up. Do the kids need to be born to start these funds? And if yes, what would be a good way to start before?
Yeah, so the Alpha Savings and Investment Club and these Zurich funds, they're not just for, I suppose, saving for kids' education. Like, a lot of my clients would actually set up two plans. They'd set up one for their kids' education in mind, and then they'd maybe set up another plan for their own savings. So to answer your question, no, you don't need to wait until your child is born to start the plan. Sorry, what was the second part of that question, Cleena?
So if yes, what would be a good way to start before? So can you start it, I suppose, in advance of the children?
Yeah, so the minimum is €100 per month per plan. So look, it might be a case of linking in with us after the webinar. Look, and we're happy to discuss your own needs there and give you kind of tailored advice around that.
Do you have to pay tax on the investment profits within these accounts?
Yeah, so anything outside of a pension generally. So one of the advantages of a pension, which I won't go into today, is any of the interest is tax free. But anything you invest in outside the realms of a pension, you generally will have to pay tax on the interest, okay? But the key thing is that with these interest rates, or with these returns that the fund is delivering, even after you deduct your charges, which are roughly about 1 to 1.5% per year, depending on your plan and how much is going in and whether it's a lump sum or regular, I won't labor it too much now. And even after the tax, you're still getting a net return which beats inflation and significantly beats deposits.
Very good.
And all of the tax, by the way, in this case, different to Trade Republic, it's all taken care of by the fund manager. So basically, the returns roll up tax-free until a point where you take out your money. And when you take out your money, whether it's some or all of the money, Zurich in this case would deduct the tax, hand it over to revenue, and pay you out your capital invested plus your net return. So it's a very convenient account for people as well. It's completely hands-off. Everything from the investment management to the advice to the tax side of things is taken care of for you.
I have this account myself for my own son. And this was a question, obviously, that I was interested to know as well. So is there a penalty if you need to withdraw early, and how much notice is required if you want to withdraw?
So Zurich have two different types of accounts. The one we would typically deal with is called the Easy Access Plan, which allows you to access all of your money from day one at absolutely no penalty. So whilst we always advise to keep the money in there for at least 5 years, for the reasons I set out earlier, you can access it at any stage at no penalty if there's an emergency. They do have another account which has exit penalties in the first 5 years. The difference is that there's a slightly less annual management charge for going with that, but most people are happy to pay the slightly higher annual management charge. There's only a difference of about 0.1% per year for the one that is instant access. So I think most people prefer to go with that. But look, again, happy to discuss it with people.
And is it better to make the investment in the child's name or the parent's name, and considering tax implications as well as accessibility in case of urgent need, obviously of intended use? So
good question, and I'll be developing on that in a while. Okay, so with Zurich, you have an option whether you set up an account in your own name, and you look, it's always in your name, you full control over it. Most people would use that for kids' education, because if you're using the money to pay for their education, it's their maintenance, so it doesn't really need to be in their name, and there's no kind of tax considerations generally. But if you're looking to actually hand over an amount of money in the future to your child, then you do have potentially some tax considerations there. So there is a separate account in Zurich called a child save account, and how it works is that the plan is set up in your name, but it's placed in a trust for your child. So from the age of 18 onwards, they become the beneficiary of the plan. And look, I'll be developing that in a second, but it counts towards the small gift exemption, which allows all of the future value to be passed on tax free.
and it might even be worthwhile maybe having a fund in your own name and in your child's name. And that's actually what I've done myself as well. But what are the fees that are associated with it, and how much of the monthly deposit is invested?
So going back up to the previous slide, 101% of your money is invested every month, but then 1% of that is taken off at the government levy. So I remember years ago when I used to work in the banks before I joined Alpha Wealth, they used to set up these plans at like 97 and 98% allocation. So not only were people losing the 1% levy, they were also losing like a contribution charge. So they were down 3% before they even, got going. And if anyone has set up plans with maybe other providers or banks, it probably would be worthwhile just to get them reviewed to make sure that you're getting the lowest fee structure. So we ensure all of your money is invested from day one. In terms of the annual fund management charge, usually if you're investing a lump sum, the charge is a bit lower than a regular monthly plan. So on average, the charges range from about 1% per year to about 1.5% per year, depending on the structure of your plan, whether it's accessible or whether it's a lump sum or regular, etc. But you'll see like the max is about 1.5% per year. So like if you basically have the active asset allocation fund here, which is doing 7.7% per year, history would have shown you that you would have enjoyed an after charge return in the region of about 6.2% per year, even after the charge is deducted, which is significantly more obviously than you're going to get in any bank, credit union or post office in the country.
That's the questions kind of that we'll deal with at this
Perfect.
stage, David. And I have one or two more that I'll come back to as you progress.
No worries. So I just showed you the active asset allocation fund to give you an idea of what one fund looks like, but there are other funds. Another fund we would typically look at within the plan is a fund called the Balance Fund. It's slightly higher risk in that it has maybe at the moment about 65% exposure to equities. So if people have a longer time frame, maybe 10 plus years, you could start in that. But I think the slide is really interesting because what it does is it shows back to it goes back to the inception of the Balance Fund when it started, which was over 30 years ago. And it basically shows you that if you held your investment for 5 years, there's only been 2 occasions out of 30 where the 5-year annualized performance was not positive since the 1980s. And if you see those 2 negative 5-year periods, the loss is actually less than 5%. So basically 93% of 5-year rolling periods since 1989 have been positive. So that's including the financial crash in 2008. It's including COVID. It's including the fall that we had in 2022. So over time, these funds are really, really resilient. Now, here's the thing, that if you had just held that investment for a further 2 years, so 7 years, the fund has never ever had a 7-year rolling period of negative returns. So again, that's why we talk about people investing their longer term savings, because history has shown that the chances are massively in your favor and long-term investors do get rewarded. So for anyone that has kids that aren't going to college for 10 plus years, I can't see any reason why you wouldn't invest in something like this to make sure that the money is growing for you and outperforming inflation. So, as I mentioned earlier, just in response to that question, there might be some tax considerations of giving your parents giving your children, should I say, or your relatives an amount of money down the line. So if you're using the proceeds of a plan, let's say, or the proceeds of saving to pay for their education costs, their fees and stuff, that's generally seen as maintenance. So it's not really a taxable gift. Whereas if you're, say, giving little Johnny 40 grand when he's in his 30s to help buy a house, there potentially is some tax implications of that. Okay. So basically we have capital acquisitions tax in Ireland, which is 33%, but there is tax-free thresholds depending on the relationship between the giver and the receiver. So for children, they can inherit or be gifted a total of 335,000 over their lifetimes, completely tax-free. And see, a lot of people I meet, they have a bit of a misconception that tax planning is for something that only concerns the wealthy, but most households in Ireland now actually have this problem, because if you take the average price of a property or a family home in Cork or Dublin and then add on, cash in the bank, value of pensions and the other assets, most children, particularly if you've only one or two, are going to be looking at a fairly hefty tax bill. Now, some people would say, look, if little Johnny inherits a fortune and has to pay a little bit of tax on it, sure, God love him. But then, on the flip side, you've obviously worked very hard to build up your wealth and build up your assets. So do you really want revenue taking a 33% cut of that? Now, there is one way where you can pass more wealth onto your relatives and your kids outside of these thresholds. And that's by taking advantage of something called a small gift exemption. The small gift exemption allows anyone to give anyone else 3 grand a year. It sounds quite small, but when it's doubled up on and over a very longer period, it can be quite powerful. Okay. So for instance, if you are in a couple, you're a married couple and you've one child, let's say, you can give 3 grand from the father and 3 grand from the mother. So 6,000 could be passed on to the child each year. If you do that over 10 years, that's 60 grand that you've passed on to your child. That does not eat into these limits here. Just to give you, I suppose, an example of how something like this could be utilized, and just in response to that query earlier as well, Zurich actually have an account called the Child Save Plan, which can go in your name, but it's set up in the basically in a trust for the child, whether that's a grandchild or your own child. And it basically, once the contributions are under €250 per month if it's in a sole person's name, or under €500 per month if it's in joint names, all of those contributions count towards the small gift exemption. So from the age of 18 onwards, the child can use the proceeds basically without eating into those thresholds. So this is where it could be handy. Okay, so let's say you've Mary and John here and they have €40,000 that they want to pass on to their grandson Luke, who's now 13 when he turns 18, to help with college accommodation and a car. As Luke falls into the Group B threshold, he can only receive 32,500. So under current capital acquisitions tax rules, he'd have to pay 33% on the remainder. So there'd be a tax bill due for Luke of about 2.5 grand if they just gave him that €40,000 now, or if they gave it to him as a lump sum when he was 18. Now, instead, Mary and John can set up a Zurich account for Luke now, and they can pay in €500 per month under the small gift exemption, which is 3,000 from each of them per year. And let's say the account earns 3.5% growth. So after 5 years, when Luke is 18, it's worth 32,733. Luke is now able to receive all of this €32,733 completely tax-free because it's counting under the small gift exemption, and he can still receive a further 32,500 from his grandparents under the capital acquisitions tax-free thresholds. So in this case, all of the 40,000 can be passed on to Luke tax-free. So it's important for people to get some professional advice on this. And look, it's one of the things we do in Alpha Wealth, looking at this for people, because as you can see from this example, it's about really identifying early on if there is a liability and putting steps in place early on to avoid it, because you can't go back in time.
David, just on the whole tax issue, right? The small annual gift exemption is outside the CAT, really.
Yeah, it's outside of these thresholds, exactly.
Okay. How likely is it that deemed disposal will be abolished and exit tax reduced in line with CGT, capital gains tax, in the upcoming budget?
Yeah, so the maybe one slight penalizing thing of funds is that, like, if you want a diversified portfolio or a fund, the tax on the interest only is 41%. Now, some people say, Jesus, why would I go into something that's 41% tax on the interest? And the simple answer is because there's nothing else out there. What are you going to do? Leave your money in a bank earning pittance and pay 33% tax on that when you can be earning decent returns and pay 41%. But it is a high tax rate, and the government have made comments that it is under review. So look, hopefully in this budget, there might be some kind of provision to reduce it. Maybe in future budgets, there is an expectation that maybe in the near future, it might be harmonized with capital gains tax and dirt tax, which are 33%. But as of now, it is 41%. In relation to the deemed disposal, that basically means that, I said earlier that the tax is only applied when you encash the plan, but there is something else called a deemed encashment year, which is every 8 years. So basically, the fund manager would deduct the tax earned between years 1 and 8, and then the balance kind of rolls over beyond that, let's say. So it kind of stops this long-term compounding effect. Do I think they're going to change that? It's hard to know, really. I wouldn't bank on it, really. But again, like, the plans do still make sense.
Another question, David, around pensions, actually. So this person is 62 and they just said, can they apply for a pension at the age of 62? They are on a contract basis in a hospital, Irish national, get a contract every 2 years from the HSE.
Yeah, no, 100%. See, I think people in Ireland have this kind of big confusion as to what a pension is. A pension is just a long-term savings plan, okay? So if you think about the three things you can do with your savings, you can put it into short-term accounts where you earn maybe 1 to 3.5% per year, i.e. banks, trade republics. You can put it into these well-diversified funds in personally, let's say, where you earn 7% per year potentially, but the savings that's going in there is from after tax money. Or you can set up a pension, invest in these exact same funds, but the only difference is that the money going in is before tax earnings. So you're getting tax relief on the money going in. So for every €100 potentially that goes into this fund, through a pension, it's only costing you €60 as a top rate taxpayer to do it. And then all of this 7% per year, let's say, is completely tax free. So there's no capital gains tax, there's no dirt tax, there's no exit tax within pensions. So it's just about doing, what's the most effective vehicle for you. So again, it's coming back to this notion of, the short-term pot, the medium to long-term pot, and maybe the very long-term pot with it, which is the pension. But even if you're coming up to retirement, it still makes sense to put money into pensions to save on the tax. And for the simple reason as well is that even when you go to draw down a pension, typically you don't draw it all out in the year you retire. You take out usually quarter of the fund as a tax-free lump sum, and then you gradually draw out the remainder over a course of years to replace your income. So again, coming back to this time frame thing, most people's pensions will remain invested even in their retirement years. And that's why people shouldn't be in a cash fund even coming up to retirement, because they're not going to take all of their money out in the year they retire. So if I look at a 60-year-old who's retiring at 65, I don't look at them as having a 5-year investment horizon ahead of them. I look at them as potentially having a 25 to 30-year investment horizon of them, i.e. to the age they're expected to live to.
I'm going to share a link to book an appointment. So if you want to kind of talk about the two different appointments that you offer, consultations. Thanks, David.
Yeah, so like, obviously a lot of today's discussions were just around saving for kids. It was good, look, that we did touch on some other areas like pensions, but We do a lot more than that in Alpha Wealth, okay, and we do provide a fantastic service for our clients, which is why we've grown so much as a company over the last 10 years. You can check out our Google reviews or Trustpilot reviews, which will attest to that. But we do provide two services for clients, which are kind of a full comprehensive financial planning consultation, which is tailored to the individual. It looks at their full financial picture, it looks at their goals and objectives, and basically provides you with a financial roadmap and recommendations to get you into the best possible financial situation now, as well as the best possible position to meet all of your future financial goals, whilst getting your money working harder for you, and saving you in tax, making sure that your family is protected. Basically, if anyone wants to look into that further, you can check out our two offerings on our website. We've our Alpha Core offering, that's 199, and then our Platinum review service, which is 349. That is a once-off fee, and it covers the initial meeting, all subsequent meetings and advice, all reviews, as well as the kind of setup of any plans. So if anybody wants to check out the Alpha Savings and Investment Club that I mentioned earlier and just wants to maybe set something up like that for their own savings or for their children, feel free to get in touch on that. But if anybody is looking for a more comprehensive financial planning service, we can help you on that as well. My own contact details are there at the bottom, dlooney@alphawealth.ie, if anybody wants to get in touch. But as I said from the beginning, look, we will opening it up to a bit of a Q&A at the end. Obviously, there was a lot of questions that came in throughout the webinar. Is there any more that we need to address, Cliona?
I think there's another one that's come in just to say, what can I do for my wife's safety in terms of her financial kind of security? I think with questions like that, people will have to kind of engage with you from a personal kind of perspective.
Yeah, again, like there for questions like that, there is no one size fits all. Like the thing about a financial plan is it needs to be tailored for you. The advice to that person might be completely different to the advice for another person, because no one person's situation or financial situation is exactly the same.
There have been some specific questions that have come in that are very specific to that person or that individual. So what I've done, David, is I've sent them on to you, and you can follow up with those individuals following the webinar. I've also shared links to our newsletter where we kind of share weekly insights and topical issues, and also links to our social channels there as well, where we are very active, and you will see kind of regular webinars that we're doing. We will you're sharing the upcoming webinars there, David, so there aren't any other questions, but we will be sharing a recording of this webinar for anyone that has asked. And David, I'll just share the your contact details with everybody here so that they can email you directly. So thanks very much, David.
Perfect. Yeah.
To you to wrap up. Thanks.
No worries. Look, I just said I'd go back up to the upcoming webinar slide just to remind people of the next webinars that we have coming up, if it's of interest to anyone. But just to close off today and say, look, thanks a million to everybody for taking the time to come on. I appreciate it. It's a lovely day. So look, wishing you all a great day and enjoy the sunshine while it lasts. Thanks.